Uh, now we're recording. Um, you will get a lot of information afterwards. At the end, I'll talk about that again, but you'll get a link to this, so don't feel like you have to try to take too crazy in notes, because you will have resources to follow up. Okay. So before we get into the specifics of the permitting situation we're dealing with here, giving you a very brief kind of primer on PFAS if you're new to it. Um, yeah, a lot of people are brand new to it, and frankly, even we who believe we know something about it realize there's way more we need to learn. But anyway, if you're brand new, just know that it's not a chemical, it's a group of thousands of chemicals that have some characteristics in common. The long name is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. That's where you get the PFAS acronym. Um, these things were first produced back in the 40s, and they go into all kinds of processes or industrial processes and products that we use, including that list there and many more. And, these are things we've come to use widely and depend on in our daily lives. So consequently, PFAS are spread throughout the world pretty extensively. Um, One of the big problems with that wide distribution is that these things last for a long, long time, and that's why people refer to them as forever chemicals. They do not break down easily in the environment, in the bodies of wildlife, or in our own bodies. And so once they're out there in the environment, once they're within people, they last, and then they accumulate through time. It's not one of these things where a pollutant or a problem shows up and then it passes on and you don't have to worry about it anymore. The other thing that's really dangerous is that these can cause harm in very, very low concentrations. For example, the EPA has proposed what they call a maximum contaminant level, or MCL, for drinking water, which is 4 nanograms per liter. If you don't not familiar with nanograms, essentially what we're talking about is 4 parts um, in parts per billion. So we're talking a tiny little bit. I think 1 part per billion people characterize that as like a drop in a swimming pool. So you can see that's a very small amount, and yet it's enough to cause real risk to human health and to the environment. Again, here's just a very partial list of some of the harms, some of the human health harms that we face, or that are either caused or likely caused by different forms of PFAS. And so it's very, very, very serious. When we talk about some of these cancers, when we talk about developmental effects, we know that those can be contributed to by very, very small amounts of certain pollutants. So we can't dismiss it because it is tiny. There's a lot more that you can learn about PFAS. And in fact, when we send you follow-up information, we're going to give you some more information and some links so that you can investigate further if you're interested. But one of the things that we realize is that when we look at this issue, when we look at these kind of chemicals that are so widespread, really ubiquitous in our world today, that there's a lot of ways that we could address this concern and the problems that are likely caused. And that can be kind of overwhelming. But what we decided to do was look at this in a very practical way and say, how can we do something that can have effect and hopefully have effect right away? What makes sense is, even though this stuff is widespread, even though it has entered the environment in many, many places, we can stop introducing it where we have the power to do that. And that's exactly what we want to do. Our laws, the Clean Water Act and state laws, already give regulators the authority to stop these kinds of discharges to our waters and to our land. And we simply want them to exercise those authorities. And so that's been our focus, and that will continue to be a primary focus for Wild Virginia's PFAS campaign. Now, along with that, obviously, is to educate everybody that we can about the risk and about the problems. But this regulatory approach is one that we think is both necessary and can be effective at having a real impact. So what we're asking you to join us in doing, what we've been doing and what we'll continue to do, is to tell the state officials, the Department of Environmental Quality, to do what they're supposed to do to keep these substances out of our water and out of the environment. And right now we have a prime opportunity to do that because of this one individual permit. There's a public comment period open right now that will end on March 14th. And we're going to submit comments, including a bunch of technical comments and kind of a legal analysis. But we need help. We need anybody who's interested, anybody who can see the threats and who has an interest to weigh in. This is one of those instances where more numbers can be of use. It's useful for the agency folks. It's useful for other decision makers to know how widespread the concern is. So once you're done with this, feel free to tell others who might be interested. We know not everybody can show up at 7 o'clock on a weeknight, but just share the information when you can. So the context for this permit, it's part of a system of permitting called the VP. You'll hear people say VPDs, Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That simply is a way that the state can regulate certain kinds of releases of water, discharges, that can carry pollutants into our streams and our lakes and our reservoirs and everything. They have that authority under the Clean Water Act and under state law, as I said before. But there's a big caveat there. You can't just discharge these wastewaters with pollutants without making sure that you're going to protect the water. And the way you do that is you meet what are called water quality standards. Those standards describe what our water bodies should look like, what kind of activities and what kind of values they should support. And that's kind of the basic requirement of the whole permitting system, that those standards be upheld. And one kind of umbrella standard, which makes a lot of sense, is that you're not supposed to cause conditions in our water bodies that are toxic, that are harmful to human health, that are harmful to aquatic life. So that's kind of the basics that we're looking for here. Now, as I say, we, Wild Virginia, have kind of a larger PFAS campaign. It's not just this one individual permit or this one facility. This is something we started quite some time ago, and we've joined with allied groups in looking at permits like this. In fact, some of those folks started commenting and introducing information way back in 2022, and we've been doing it for more than a year. And essentially what we've looked at is specific facilities, both municipal, meaning city or town wastewater plants, or industrial facilities that discharge. And we started with ones where we thought there was a pretty good likelihood, almost a certainty in some cases, that those discharges would include PFAS. And obviously there were things to look for. Did they have processes where they use PFAS as part of the industrial process? Did they produce products that are known to have PFAS? And for the municipal plants, do they receive water that comes from one of those kinds of industries? Um, Unfortunately, although we have put that kind of information forward, we've introduced evidence and we've made the kind of legal arguments about why DEQ is supposed to do a better job of this permitting requirement. They're just not doing it. And that's why we continue on this track, because that's unacceptable. And we're not going to stop with them just saying, no, we won't, or no, we can't, because we know that they can. This particular plant, the Scottsville plant, which is operated by the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority, we picked this one for two reasons. First, it was coming up for a permit review, but then more importantly, we found out from the authority themselves that they had data. They have actually sampled the water that discharges out of their facility into water bodies that has significant amounts of PFAS. We found they provided us with data from sampling periods from May 2020 through last fall, September. And in almost every case, those samples had significant amounts of PFAS. You'll see that chart there. The biggest number you see is 177, nearly 178 nanograms per liter, or parts per billion. Remember that maximum contaminant level I mentioned from EPA, which was 4 nanograms per liter. Now, that is for drinking water, and this is not drinking water. We hope nobody is directly drinking this water, but that just gives you a sense of the scale and the comparison and the reason why this is really worrisome, that we have these kinds of levels. So this facility, it's a relatively small treatment facility, again, down in Scottsville, right near the James River. As treatment facilities go, as wastewater plants go, it's relatively small. It produces, or it can discharge up to 200,000 gallons a day. Compared to some of the other facilities we've commented on, which are 20 or 30 million gallons a day, this is relatively small, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Any of these can have significant environmental impacts. And again, you just have to go back to the fact that very small amounts of these PFAS chemicals can cause significant problems if they get out there into the environment. This is, I hope you can see this well enough, but this shows you kind of the layout. You'll see over to the left where the discharge actually enters a small stream. It flows from west to east. It actually goes under a county park, Dorier Park, which is owned by or operated by Albemarle County. And then it emerges above ground, goes through a berm, essentially under the road, and into another creek. That I'm told is called Mink Creek. It's not on the official maps, but that's what I understand it's called. And then it goes to the James River. Now, you see down to the right there where the boat ramp is there at Scottsville. This area, of course, is one of the most heavily used recreational areas on the James River, anywhere accessible to Albemarle County, Charlottesville, and a lot of the other localities around here. And the fact is that if there's any significant amount of PFAS going into the river at this point, then it's going to be accessible to people who are using that river. They're going to be exposed to it to some degree. The other thing, of course, is that these small streams, including the one that goes by the park, under the park, behind a school, those are all water bodies that we had to be concerned about having access to. Now, we're not trying to be alarmist here. We're not trying to tell anybody be scared of going in the James River or be scared of going to the park or anything like that. What we're saying is we know there's a risk and we know that we can alleviate that risk, and that's what we should be doing. So we went and got the documents. The DEQ, once they start a process of looking at a proposed permit, they prepare what they call a draft permit and a fact sheet. Now, that fact sheet and all the materials that come with it are supposed to describe exactly what they looked at, why they included certain or want to include certain requirements in the permit, and why they don't. And what we found out is that despite the fact that that data exists showing that PFAS is coming out of this discharge, that DEQ hasn't even acknowledged it. In fact, we did the search so you didn't have to, but out of the many pages that are in that fact sheet and in that permit, I can testify that PFAS is not even mentioned, much less dealt with in a proper way. You know, my teachers in math used to always say, don't just give me the answer, show me your work. And this is the place where DEQ is supposed to show us their work. In this fact sheet, they should list the data, they should tell what it is, and they should analyze what requirements are needed because of that data. And they just basically have refused to do that so far. So this permit, if it is issued as DEQ has proposed so far, wouldn't include any requirements for monitoring of PFAS going forward, and it wouldn't have any requirements that would limit the amount of PFAS that's going into the water right now. And that's what's needed. So again, here's the kind of practical information. And again, you'll get this in our follow-up. But essentially, the personnel, the person at DEQ who will gather these comments and who will make sure that they get reviewed is listed here. He's in the Harrisonburg office of DEQ. And there's the information about the actual permit number and all that kind of thing. We just want to make sure people know that that deadline is there and that we're helping you get comments in if you want to, and we're very much encouraging it. So just going to run through some ideas on things you can include in permits. The one overall comment I would say is that everybody has something useful to say. I'm going to talk about in a bit that if you have some specific skills or specific knowledge, that can be really useful and you want to describe that. But everybody has an interest in and a right to comment on our waters. We call them state waters for a reason. They belong to all of us. So don't feel like if you're not a lawyer or you're not a scientist that you don't have the qualifications to comment, because you absolutely do. If you use the James River, or if you want to use the James River in that area, if you've had access to that area in Scottsville and any of those creeks or the park itself, then you've come into an area where you could be in contact with these substances. And that should be of concern. It should be something that where it is something that gives you an interest specifically in this permit. You can describe why you had concerns about these chemicals in this discharge for the very reasons that I described earlier, the kind of dire impacts they can have on people and on the environment. And finally, we all have a right to expect DEQ to actually carry out the law and the authorities that it's given. They're there to help protect us and our resources, and we all have a right to insist on that. Again, as I described, we know that there are PFAS coming out of this discharge, going into these water bodies in significant amounts, and that's one of the things that would be good to mention. And again, I'm sorry. as I said, the current proposed permit that DEQ's put forward doesn't deal with that data. It doesn't do an analysis and say, because of these levels, here's what we're going to do. They simply don't mention it. And that's just unacceptable. One of the things that should happen going forward, no matter what, is that monitoring should be included in the permit going forward. You know, the fact is that it is likely that the vast majority of these kind of wastewater treatment plants will have PFAS. So there's really no reason that DEQ shouldn't require all or most of them to do monitoring on an ongoing basis. Now, this is what I mentioned before, that if you happen to have any kind of special expertise or background, that gives you a little bit of specific insight into these problems or into the way that PFAS is a concern, or the way it might act in the environment, then that's useful. And you know, please spell that out. You know, one thing though, a lot of people have expertise. Let's say you're a fishing guide, or let's say you're somebody who rents inner tubes or canoes or boats in that area. You also have a specialty. You know about where you would want to go yourself. You know where your customers would and might be concerned about going to use the waters. So there's a lot of kinds of expertise. So again, think expansively about that. One thing that we're doing, and we're really encouraging other people to do, is to ask DEQ to hold a public hearing about this permit. In addition to this chance to submit written comments, which is available for all permits, DEQ can take the next step and then hold a public hearing where people can show up, give verbal comments. And that's really valuable for a lot of people who are not prepared or not comfortable doing this kind of thing in writing. They can show up and they can say their piece in person. The other thing is that folks who show up can hear each other and what their neighbors and what their friends' concerns are. And that teaches everybody a little bit about, you know, the breadth of the concerns there. And through having a public hearing, that will extend the chance for more and more people to find out about this situation. And again, there's lots to know here. And we just want to make sure that it is widespread as possible. Frankly, by Wild Virginia having this event and trying to get the word out there through the media, we're really creating more of a public information system than DEQ has. They're pretty much happy a lot of times to put their little legal notice in the newspaper and on their website. And if nobody sees it, you know, they go ahead with their business. But we don't want it to work that way. We want everybody to have a say. Did I go backwards? Yes. Okay. So that's a lot of specifics. I know it's quick, but it gives you a little bit of background on what kind of facility we're dealing with, what the potential threats are. The thing we know, though, that a lot of folks just aren't used to doing these kind of comments at all. And some people are really wary about it. They're really concerned that they're not going to do it right. Again, I'll stress that your opinions matter, no matter how you express them. But we've had a lot of experience at Wild Virginia in helping people do it in maybe the most effective way. And so this is where I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jackie Goodrum, who has put together some really good information on just some kind of basic rules on how you go about doing comments. I will say that we have a whole program on this that we can give you access to if you would like to go into it in more detail. But for now, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Jackie Goodrum, and I'm a policy consultant at Wild Virginia, and I'm also a lecturer at UVA where I teach a course on public commenting for environmental advocacy. So I'm going to share with you some writing tips for effective comment now that you know about the context for this comment opportunity and the content for what should go into the comment. So, what I want you to remember is these three words: clear, concise, and convincing. An effective comment is clear, concise, and convincing because you have to remember that the person who's responsible for reviewing your comment, the agency official, may have hundreds or even thousands of comments to read. So you need to frame your comment in a clear, concise, and convincing manner to get your point across and also make it easy to read and also interesting to read so that they want to keep reading. So, clear, concise, and convincing comments are those that include factual information that is relevant, sound legal or scientific reasoning, and supporting evidence or authority, and it connects the decision that's being made, in this case, issuing a permit, to how it impacts you and your community. And so, an effective comment is one that has the potential to influence environmental decision making. Next slide, please. So, first step, you want to make your comment clear. So, you need to think before you start writing. You need to stop and gather information, including details from a public notice, such as the submission deadline, which here it's March 14th. The comment recipient: who is the agency or the agency official that you're writing to for this comment opportunity? How are you going to submit your comment? What are the submission methods that they accept? Usually nowadays you can do it online or by email, and you can still mail handwritten or typed comments in through the post. Also, you need to identify the comment scope. And what I mean by this is, what is the question that the agency is asking? What information are they seeking? And what decision is being made? So, here in the context of the Scottsville facility, the agency is looking at, do we issue this permit with the same mechanisms and controls as it already has? Or is there anything new or different that we should add? Additionally, a clear comment should be one where you have a format that is organized. Include an introductory paragraph. It can just be short, where you introduce yourself and your reason for commenting. It should also have a body paragraph where you explain your reasons using facts and as well as a conclusion. There should be clear transitions between your paragraphs. One way to think of this is that there's a quote from a former EPA lawyer who also is an expert in commenting and wrote this book called The Art of Comment. And how she described effective comments is, effective comments look good and read well. It should be fairly effortless in reading. Even when you're writing it, before you send it in and you do a final review, you should read it through and go like, yes, this is very easy to read. This makes sense. It's very clear. Also consider using ordered lists, saying first, second, third as you transition between your paragraphs, or you're giving reasons for why you are commenting. Next slide, please. You also want to make your comment concise. And so concise does not necessarily mean short, but what it does mean is giving a lot of information clearly and in a few words. So a concise comment is one that's brief but comprehensive. You're saying everything you want to say, but in as few words as possible. I would say for a comment opportunity like this, consider about 1 page to 500 words being about the minimum. But you could write as many pages as you want, just as long as you're saying what you want to say and not using excess words. Next page, or next slide, please. Thanks. And finally, make your comment convincing. And so, one way to do this is to assert your authority and do this early. Do this in your introductory paragraph. So, when you're writing, like, Dear agency official, my name is name, and I am, and that's where you can include information, factual information that connects you to this permitting and commenting opportunity. And you can talk about how you are this particular expert, either professionally or personally, because you've been fishing on this river all your life, or you've been guiding boaters up and down this river, things like that. Or you're a Clean Water Act lawyer, or you're a scientist. That's where you can introduce yourself and assert your authority and tell them who you are and why they should listen to you. as Dave and I have both mentioned, this experience can be personal or professional. Personal, I would say, I would describe it as someone who's directly or indirectly affected by the agency decision. You could be a landowner, a community member, a business owner. Here, you could be a recreationalist, an angler. And professionals, we think of someone who is a relevant subject matter expert, a scientist, a health professional, a lawyer, etc. But asserting your authority and leaning on your personal or professional experience lends weight to your comment. It gives the agency a sense of, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. So a convincing comment is also relevant, so please stay on topic. A convincing comment is one that uses because statements, and this is a writing technique for connecting your reason for commenting to your argument, your reason or your argument to your support, legal or factual, for the point that you are trying to make. So an example here might be that agency must include limits of PFAS discharges in this permit because PFAS is a toxic pollutant that harms human health. One other trick for writing a convincing comment is to show and not tell. And this is another writing technique. It means using imagery or word pictures to describe factual situations rather than just stating them. And finally, one way to ensure that your comment is convincing is to refrain from insults. This is distinct from critiquing. Criticism is always okay, and I would describe criticism as highlighting errors or other omissions and also reminding the agency of their legal duties, which is exactly what commenting can do and should do many times, including in this opportunity. But you're supporting those claims, DEQ, you should be doing X or Y with relevant facts or law if appropriate. For example, earlier Dave was explaining how this is an opportunity to remind DEQ of the duties that they have, and he discussed how they have these existing authorities under the Clean Water Act to limit PFAS discharges if they had the willpower to do so. So that is a criticism, that is a critique, and that is totally okay. That is distinct from an insult where you might be calling them stupid or lazy, or if you're attacking them personally. Because remember, there's a person who is reading your comment at the end of this, and if they're reading something that makes them as a person feel bad, they're not going to want to keep reading, and your comment will not positively influence decision making. They won't want to side with your argument. They won't want to trust what you're saying. So that is another way, another tip or trick for ensuring that you are writing a convincing comment. No personal insults. All right, next slide. And I think I'm turning it back over to Dave.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up on that just a little bit. You always give me things to think about, Jackie. But one of the things that I've learned through time, all those hints about being concise, being organized, absolutely that's important for the person with the agency who's going to look at these comments, because they're in general going to take that information and pass it on to somebody who's going to make the final decision. Whoever the person is who is going to go through these piece by piece, they have to communicate it to somebody, to their boss, to the director, to whoever's going to make the final decision. So every step of the way that you can make it clear, that's good for the next step. The other thing that we know, because we have challenged agency decisions in quite a few cases, is that there may be another step. And I'm not saying that for this permit or for any particular decision that we all of a sudden jump to, we're going to do a lawsuit. But it is useful to think about what happens when that is another step. Now, we always think about that as a possibility because we're expecting the agency to carry out its legal duty. And if it does not, then we have to consider what else can we do. So what's useful to think about in that context is not only do you want this agency person to be able to grasp what you're saying and interpret it and use it, but next step, you might end up being before a judge at some point. Now, that person is less of an expert about any of these issues than the folks at the agency. And so again, you can be as detailed as you want, or as you need to be. You can give as much specific technical information or legal information, but just realize again that every step of the way, there's yet another person maybe who you need to inform and hopefully influence what they're going to do. So thanks, Jackie. Again, we've got lots of information through Wild Virginia on how to do these kinds of things, and we're more than happy to help folks do it. If you have specific questions, we're going to take questions here in a minute, but going forward, if you're preparing comments and you'd like somebody to look at them and give you advice, you'll know where to find us. As a follow-up to this, we'll send you a link to this recording. So of course you can watch it again. I wouldn't expect everybody to want to do that, to go through that punishment of listening to me again. But you might think of things you want to follow up on. But even more important, if you know somebody that couldn't make it, you might share it with, that'd be great. We'll give you the slideshow itself so you can just flip through those and get specific information. And then a fact sheet that kind of breaks things down. And finally, some of that more general information about PFAS, because again, I know a lot of people are new to it. Anyhow, we're going to stop there and take questions, and I'm going to get my partners here to help me kind of look through those questions and maybe read out some of them to us.
Yeah, so we have about 7 questions. I can read off the first one to start. This one is from Anne. She says, San Rosal's bill was introduced on this to VA legislature just ending. How did it fare?
Okay. Unfortunately, the original bill that Sam Rizal introduced and that a companion bill that was introduced in the Senate, which we really supported strongly, got changed. Both of those bills had amendments and got kind of combined with some other issues. Now, we were concerned about those changes, the amendments that were made, but kind of worked through them and finally came to a position where we supported the bills. And both of those bills, the Senate bill and the House bill, passed to their respective houses, and we believe will go to the governor's desk for a signature. So that's a step forward, and we're happy about that. The thing we don't want people to think is because we took those steps that we somehow solved the problem through legislation, because we still have much more to do. But in any case, we thank Delegate Rizal, we thank Senator McPike, who was our champion in the Senate, for taking those steps, because that's really important. So I hope that answers your question.
I'll just add, Dave, because I think it's really important that you pointed out that just because we've taken that one step doesn't mean we've solved the whole problem. This bill that Delegate Radul patroned, it takes a small step, but its focus is on monitoring and drinking water. It does not do anything to stop the contamination in the first place. And that's what we're talking about here with this public comment opportunity on the Scottsville permit. This is an opportunity to limit and stop the contamination from happening in the first place.
All right. What else do we have?
All right, our second question is, what is the unit of measurements of PFAS? Did you say nanograms?
It's nanograms per liter. So it's how much of that substance would be found in a liter of water. And again, a nanogram is 1/billionth of a gram. So you can see that that's a very, very small amount. Okay.
And then our third question is, do we know about PFAS anywhere else other than Scottsville? Has any sampling in other areas been discovered?
Yes, and in fact, some of it is within the system that the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority operates. They gave us data from 4 of their wastewater plants, the one in Scottsville and 3 others up closer to Charlottesville, one on Moores Creek, and I honestly can't remember the names of the other 2. They're smaller ones. All 4 of those plants have significant amounts of PFAS. And, that's part of the picture here is that, again, we're not just focusing on this one plant and this one permit as if that's going to solve everything, but this needs to start the process both for the authority and for the state to come out with an approach that's going to work from here on out so that we don't have to fight over every single permit, that we figure it out and we go forward doing it right from now on. The one other place we've looked at, and we will be having some public information about this one, is down in Hampton Roads, all the way at the other end of the state, where one of their facilities, it's called the Hampton Roads Nansemond plant, has significant amounts of PFAS. Now, there probably are others out there that have data, but we haven't been able to get that out of DEQ yet. So what we're doing is we're starting a process where we're going to request information from facilities all over the state. So we're going to build a database so that we know. And that's another thing that folks can do going forward, is to contact their own water supplier or the people who process their city's wastewater and say, hey, do you have any data? Give it to me. Because again, it's all public information. It all belongs to us as long as it's a publicly owned facility. Okay, next.
Yep. Who did the work discovering this contamination to begin with in the Scottsville area?
Again, I'll give credit to the folks at the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority. I think if you're in this area, you may have seen some of the news items, is they actually found it in their water supply, and they found it in the Ravenna River. So I'm guessing that prompted them to then go back and do what we've been telling people we should do, is kind of move upstream. Once you find it in the environment, or once you find it in a water supply, let's go back and find out where it came from and stop it. And so again, I'll give them credit. They went and sampled at all these places, at least these 4 wastewater plants. And when we asked, do you have any data, they readily gave it to us. So we're happy about that. And again, we're hoping that some of the other municipalities will act the same way. And I'll say we've reached out to the authority here and told them, we want to work together. We want to build support for you guys to do what you need to do. And that's part of the public information aspect here. So I hope that answers the question.
All right, our next question asks, what are reliable sources where we can learn more about the effects on wildlife?
Okay, well, we're going to help you with that. And there's an exciting event that's coming up next month on April 25th. Wild Virginia is going to have another online program where we're going to bring in some experts who can talk about PFAS's effects or impacts on wildlife. Now, I'll say that this is not an area of study that people have been doing for a long time. The information is not as widespread as we would like, but there are some folks doing some really interesting study out there. So we're gonna help you find some of those sources also. So thanks for that.
The next question asks for relevant facts or lies for including in your comment, and then good places to look for reliable info on re-effects for human health.
Okay, I didn't get quite the first sentence you had there. Reliable.
Yeah, so they are asking for relevant facts or lies. I'm assuming referring to the commenting section
Okay.
to include.
Yeah. Well, again, we're going to give you, the first part of the facts is that this permit is it issued, that it has PFAS, and here's the environment it goes to. But as far as the impacts, again, we're going to provide you with some links and some information where you can you can look a little bit more about what the kind of health effects are. I mean, I gave you that one slide, which I realize is just a drop in the bucket as far as what you might want to know. But we can and we will follow up with information on how you can understand that a lot more.
Real quick, I wanted to clarify. I had said relevant facts or laws, not lies. You should never lie in a
Okay.
comment, but the relevant facts that you provide will be tailored to your personal or professional experience. So, for example, if you are writing this comment because you are an angler who fishes on the James, then the types of facts that you're going to include about you are going to be how many years you've been fishing, whether you've noticed any changes in the fish population or in the fish species throughout these years, how frequently you fish on the river, what parts of the river you fish in, and whether you've noticed like anything near the wastewater treatment plant. Those are some examples of facts about you that you would include. And you would also include the factual information that Dave shared about what we know is publicly available, that there is data that the RSW is collecting that shows that this facility is definitely discharging PFAS. So that was another fact that you would include for this particular situation. For laws, if that is something that you feel comfortable discussing, then in this particular situation, you would talk about the Clean Water Act and water quality standards and those regulations. So relevant facts or laws, never lie.
Thanks. I heard that word and I wasn't sure what it was. So thanks for clarifying. Okay, next.
Yeah, so our next question, they explain that they live down the river in Newport News and are a master naturalist, and they ask, will they give equal weight to Virginia citizens outside of the vicinity of Scottsville?
They are supposed to. You know, again, these are state waters, which means that they belong to all of us. Um, you can have a very direct interest in using that particular part of the river or that particular area in Scottsville. But in any case, you have an interest in the James River. You're at the other end of it. And the fact is, as I said, these materials, they don't go away and they just accumulate through time. So unfortunately, or fortunately for you, you're down at the end where kind of you get the net result of all that happens in the whole watershed. But again, you know, one interest that we all have is in DEQ actually doing what the law says they're supposed to. And the fact is that if they don't do it right here, then when it gets to the facilities or the activities that are more directly affecting you, then there's a good chance they're not going to do it there either. So we're trying to fix the system, not just one or two specific places. So I hope that makes sense.
Our next question is the EPA looking at banning the whole class of PFAS chemicals?
Banning the what?
The whole class of PFAS chemicals.
Um, I don't I don't know that they're at this point preparing to go anywhere near that far. Um, you know, there are a couple of forms of PFAS that essentially have either been stopped, that production has stopped. But as far as the whole class, again, we're talking thousands of chemicals. So I would not hold my breath for that kind of what would I call it? Huge change.
Blanket.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a blanket change. And again, that makes it kind of like, well, gosh, is it worth doing any of this if they're still going to be out there? And that's where I come back and say, despite the fact that it's a big problem, despite the fact, and the fact is that EPA can ban all the subjects or all the projects, processes, and products they want, but probably the most effective way to stop things from being produced is for us to stop buying them. So we need to think about that aspect also. But That doesn't mean that I wouldn't advocate for EPA to do a lot more, to find more of the sources and to ban them. But again, I wouldn't count on it right away. We're just trying to focus on something we think that can be and should be done right now.
Just to add, EPA has been targeting PFAS on a PFAS by PFAS basis. They are definitely not doing any regulation on a class-wide basis. And so what that means is that regulating PFAS will take a very long time. And it's a very slow-moving process, which is why it's so important to do everything we possibly can now.
Yeah, the kind of standard list of types of PFAS that EPA has so far kind of focused on is 40 separate substances. And even then, they haven't addressed all those by any means in the same way. But at least they have kind of that standard list. But again, that's 40 in the context of thousands of substances. Okay.
All right. Our next question asks, is there any communication and coordination between municipal treatment facilities across Virginia?
The answer is we don't know very much about that at this point. I suspect there probably is. I mean, there is an organization that kind of represents the interest of wastewater facilities, wastewater municipal authorities across the state. So I suspect that there's information that is shared amongst all those folks. And again, in this case, in the case of the Hampton Roads folks that we dealt with directly, they've been very forthcoming. When they had data, they told us so. There's been some others who didn't have any data, and they told us that. So, that's valuable. But again, these folks, they're doing a job on our behalf, and we want to make it more possible for them to do a good job. And we're happy to do that. Okay. What else do you have?
All right. Our last question is, Ravenna treats drinking water with granulated carbon filters, which I believe can remove PFAS. Could wastewater treatment plants be asked to introduce GAC filtering wastewater, or are there other treatments for removal of these chemicals?
Granular activated carbon is one possibility for wastewater treatment. Now, because the nature of wastewater is different from, or at least hopefully, quite a bit different from the water that is coming out of your water supply plant, there could be complications and reasons it does not work as well. There are other things like ionic treatment, reverse osmosis. There are a number of things that are possible. But activated carbon or granular activated carbon is one possibility. Now, we do know that there are some circumstances where it has worked with wastewater. But again, each one of these facilities and the water that they discharge can have different characteristics. And, I'll say again, we're not saying this is a simple equation that, you just assume that you know the answer at the end. It's going to be a process. But we do know that it can be treated, and it has to be. One of the points that I keep making to people in the municipalities, to DEQ, to anybody who will listen, is the fact that there are difficulties, the fact that there are questions we can't answer yet, doesn't mean we should wait, because it's never going to get easier. And it's never going to get cheaper. We know that it will cost money to put in new treatment units to deal with these things. But that's not going to get cheaper 6 months or a year or 5 years down the road. Now is the time to start figuring it out so that we can solve it as soon as possible. Okay. Is that the end of the list?
Yes, that was all the questions.
Okay. Well, we're at 7:59. Amazing timing that I could never have planned.
Actually, I think someone just sent in a question.
Okay, great.
Yeah, they
Oh, it's a clarification from a mistake that occurred earlier. One about the measurements, the nanogram. It's actually 1 part per trillion, not 1 part per billion.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yes. And also, with regards to the maximum contaminant levels, that EPA has proposed those for PFOA and PFOS at 4 parts per trillion, because that's the current limit of detection. But the health-based, non-enforceable maximum contaminant level that EPA desires everyone to reach is actually 0.
Very good details. Yes. Yeah, that's one of the complications is we're still figuring out how to reliably measure some of these things. And just because we can't measure below, say, 4 parts per million or trillion right now, doesn't mean that it couldn't be a problem even lower. One of the things I've seen through the years is certain pollutants that we did start to regulate years ago, because there was a need. We started figuring out better and better how to analyze it, how to measure it, and then how to control it. So, and I'll say that the fact that there are any PFAS in a discharge that is measurable, that is above the detectable limit, is a problem, period. We should not have levels, because this is not a naturally occurring situation. There are pollutants that you expect to be in the water. You just don't want to be too much, like turbidity or solids or nutrients. But this is not in that category. Shouldn't be there. We need to keep it from being added. So thanks very much for that clarification. Okay, is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. Look out for your email to follow up. We'll get you as much information as we can. Please come back if you have more questions. And I will say that feel free to copy any comments that you might submit to us. We like to keep track of what other folks are doing, if you feel comfortable with that. But in any case, we'll sign off now and let you have the rest of your night back.